and then confer with the commission's recommendation.
Oh, Lord Jesus.
Specifically, the recommendations are to accept and file the proposed homelessness report by the Social Services Commission, and B,
What are we gonna do?
approve staff's recommendation that the Social Services Commission prioritize the creation of a city homeless plan and return to council for its adoption and for quarterly updates on progress. And lastly, it's to approve the staff's recommendation to direct the city manager to explore creating a homeless task force comprised of city staff and partnering agencies. Councilmember Mattucci.
Thank you, Mayor. On the recommendations, do we have any outlook on possibly adopting an ordinance or drafting up an ordinance for adoption? I don't know who I'm asking. It's what's confusing about these joint meetings. Who to talk to?
Who's the boss?
That the discussion of the Martin versus Boise case is on the council part of the agenda. There are no proposed ordinances tonight for the reasons stated in that item, but basically it boils down to the case is up for what's called certiorari. We're seeking review to the U.S. Supreme Court. But right now we are bound by that decision. So unless you have
Those ordinances are
enough shelter
appropriate.
beds for your homeless, and there's a slew of unanswered questions based on how Boise is worded.
Jesus.
But at a minimum, unless you have enough shelter beds for the number of your homeless population, you cannot enforce any laws that deal with the condition of being homeless, namely camping or sleeping or any of those kind of normal conditions.
Not what?
Okay, so
What?
on the recommendations, we don't really talk about any, not even exploring possible an ordinance with those I guess requirements.
What?
As part of this one, no. If you want to, in item 9A, I believe that's the number, staff, one of the things that staff asks is ask for directions on next steps to take. So that could be the point that council could get direction on that.
Okay, when we do 9A, this is for clarification for me. When we do 9A, I mean, when we close this off, it doesn't seem like we're moving in any direction other than doing the same old stuff.
Yep. Pretty much.
Again, as part of 9A, we can have a further discussion on that, but it essentially amending an ordinance without the city somehow providing shelter beds is meaningless, because the police won't be able to enforce it. So a police officer who enforced a homeless or camping related ordinance would be subject to 1983 lawsuit personally, because the law is clear as of this point, at least in the Ninth Circuit, you cannot enforce that. So even if they went out and we adopted a law tonight, the police can't enforce it until we get shelter beds. So that would have to be,
This is ridiculous.
The direction of the council is to pursue
Come on, Supreme Court.
some sort of ordinance amendment, which is something the council could choose to do. Part and parcel of that is we better find a way to get at least 180 shelter beds, because the homeless count had, I believe it was 226, and then I believe 46 were in existing shelter facilities or that were qualified as shelter facilities. So without those 180 beds, there can be no enforcement, because that would subject the police department, the city, and individual officers to personal liability.
And which I understand, and that's why I thought we were gonna have a discussion tonight of possibly talking about shelters, safe parking spaces, and et cetera. But it seems like the direction that we're doing here is we're completely shying away from a possible ordinance. I know that some cities such as Manhattan Beach, they have much lower homeless count, but I know for a fact that they don't have any shelters. They made arrangements with outside shelters. Is that something that Torrance could possibly explore?
As discussed in my item, that is something that could be explored. There are questions of whether you can actually provide shelters outside of your own jurisdiction.
Oh my God.
Boise is very difficult to, it's very vague, it's hard to understand, but a narrow reading of Boise is you must provide your shelters in your town. It's not clear, but that's one of the things that if you read Boise narrowly, that it would be that you would have to provide the shelter beds within your own town.
outrageous.
Again, it's a very vague decision. It just happened in April with the modified decision. But those are all things that obviously the Supreme Court may or may not address. And it may lead to years of litigation as each city tries to figure out its way to go. The Manhattan Beach Ordinance, just for the public's edification, was adopted in 2018, which is 6 to 9 months before Boise was decided. Manhattan then kind of modified their ordinance by providing shelter beds. I believe they were first in Downey, and I believe now they're in San Pedro. And that's one of the questions is, can they do that? And there is no real answer at this point.
Okay, so hypothetically speaking, let's say that we do put together a task force, we put together a homeless plan. In that homeless plan, it says that we are going to build a shelter for 170 some odd beds. Can Measure H funding be used for that particular purpose for actual housing?
No. H specifically avoided construction of the housing as such. The plan would allow us to get funds from the county to assist individuals with mental health and other types of activities, but it does not provide any construction monies as such.
Okay, and I actually already knew the answer to that, but I wanted you guys to say it. And the reason I want you guys to say it, because it brought me to my next point, is I was against Measure H because it didn't really provide much of anything other than more outreach, managers, programs. There's, when I said last 2 weeks ago that it was a bunch of bureaucracy, that's what I keep on seeing is a bunch of bureaucracy. Bottom line is that people want these individuals off the streets and into programs. That's the bottom line. Like the lady that almost ran somebody over, that gentleman should have never been there
Yes.
to begin with. And I find it frustrating when I hear a sinking ship. That's a sinking ship, Jimmy Gow. What you
Yes.
described as a sinking ship. And Los Angeles, as a county, is one big sinking ship.
Yes.
Now, unless we move towards getting these individuals, I'm talking about the individuals, 30%, 40%, 90%, whatever that number is. It's the individuals that are intoxicated, drug addicts, mentally ill, soiled, sitting on our bus benches, defecating in our streets, in our parks. Unless we move towards getting those individuals off the streets and getting them into help. Now, some might say, well, you're mean. You just want them incarcerated. I don't want them incarcerated. You know which ones I want incarcerated? The ones that are breaking the law. Because since when defecating in public is no longer against the law? Since when urinating, exposing yourself? I'll tell you a little story. A couple of years ago, I called Torrance Police, and look, I understand you guys have priority calls. There was a gentleman on Pacific Coast Highway exposing himself.
Jesus.
20 minutes later, nobody showed up. I was told that it was not a priority call. At what point did Torrance become so blind to where we put compassion for a small few of mentally ill drug addicts, alcoholics? I'm not talking about the ones that are financially homeless. I'm talking about everybody else that chooses to be homeless. I get worked up because, in 1977 when I moved here, we moved, my family picked Torrance, you know why? Because of the beautiful single family residence. Beautiful neighborhoods, well kept, upkept, streets that were like bowling alleys. And decades later, all I see is neglect, and now, about a week ago, I had 2 transients defecating in the park across the street from my house in the middle of the day.
Wow.
I called the police on this. I actually even took pictures, and some of you complained that I took pictures. Because it seems like if I don't take a picture, it doesn't exist.
That's it.
This is a problem, and you know what I see? I see a problem in this, that we're just going to do an extension of what Los Angeles is doing, which is failing. Los Angeles has all these beautiful task force, but if none of that Measure H money can go towards building a shelter and providing beds and putting together an ordinance that actually gets people off the streets, we might as well just wrap everything up tonight and just go home. Because that's what I see. think it's a bunch of and some of you may say, he's grandstanding. No, I'm pissed off.
Thank you.
I'm pissed
We're
off.
pissed off too.
Go home and give
I'm
up.
seeing the same things over and over.
I don't want to hear about compassion. I want to hear about what about compassion for us?
Specifically on June 4th, for an ordinance to come back. And I don't care how we get that thing done. Now, I know the mayor said that it was unconstitutional. I don't see any court saying that Manhattan Beach's decision ordinance was unconstitutional yet. Now, it might be challenged. But since when did Torrance
do
stop
something.
fighting these challenges? Bottom line, we want people off the streets, these drug addicts, alcoholics, and mentally ill. They need to be off the streets and into programs to help them. I don't want them in jail. I want them getting help. Is that too much to ask for? And yes, I'd rather fight the ACLU any day
Yes.
than a grieving family of a lady like in Long Beach that got murdered by a transient with guess what, an electric scooter. Her head was smashed in by somebody that was mentally deranged. I would rather fight the ACLU
Me too.
Me too.
than
Yep.
fighting that.
Me too.
That was somebody's grandma, somebody's mother, somebody's daughter. That was smashed
Where was the
in.
compassion
How about
for
the
her?
gentleman that was with a 5-year-old in his arms, got stabbed in the neck and died in front of his family?
That was in
at a
Ventura.
restaurant? Are we going to wait for these individuals to just start killing in our street? Now, okay, Aurelio, you're going off on a tangent here. But all I see, yeah, I know, Tim.
Whoa, Tim's rude.
In your world, it seems like we need to just accept what's going on as the new normal.
No.
I refuse to accept this as the
Timmy's
new normal.
rude.
This is not the new normal. This is not Torrance. We need to get these individuals off the streets. And I don't think we need to leave here until we figure it out.
Works for me.
9B, 9C, 9F, I don't care what item we bring back, but we need to bring back an item that actually is going to do something, because what I see, it is just more bureaucracy.
Yes.
Yep, that's right.
I'm rather disappointed. I'm disappointed that we haven't looked farther out. We haven't looked, we're just really just stopping at whatever has already failed. Does anybody sitting up here think that this is actually going to do anything to get the drug addicts, alcoholics, and mentally ill off the street? Does anybody think?
No.
Because what's in here is just an extension of what Los Angeles is doing.
Yep.
And they failed. Let's not do what Los Angeles does.
They wasted $1 billion already.
Yep.
$19 million spent in Spa 8. $19 million. 500,000 to upwards of $1 million
Just
per
got a problem,
transient
huh?
being spent on housing. Do you actually think that giving an individual a house is what would have got that man in the gutter off the gutter? Oh, here's the keys to a condo
That's
in
not what it
Malibu.
means.
Thank you. You think that's going to
But-
solve
Housing
the
and shelter
problem? Of
isn't
course it's not. I
always
think
a house for you.
But that's part of it.
But what I've seen
Yeah.
here is failure in the making.
Yep.
And unless we actually truly talk about solutions,
Yes.
truly talk about an ordinance that's going to get people off the street, because I think some of the, once you get them into housing, that was one of the quotes, once you get them into housing, their lives change. The key word, once you get them into housing. How do we get them into housing if the police officers don't have any leverage? They don't have an ordinance that can say,
You don't have
sorry,
housing to
sir,
get them
or
into.
ma'am, in the city of Torrance, you can't sleep on the street, but we can provide you with this, and this service,
Yes.
Yeah.
okay?
Yes.
Okay.
That's a solution.
Yes.
That's a solution. Another quote that was made by somebody was, mandatory program saved his life. Keyword, mandatory.
Yes.
And I say, well, that's mean, that's not freedom. What about our freedom?
Yeah.
What about our community? What about our rights?
True.
The rights of everybody else. Why does 99.99% of the population has to put up with this? Why?
That's how
Why
they
do we
make
have
money.
to put up with it? That's why.
That's exactly it.
No, you know what it is?
It's a fucking racket.
It's failure. It's failure of our community.
Pardon my
Because,
English.
you guys are here tonight because you want change. This is not change.
No, it's not.
No.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna vote no on the recommendations because it doesn't have an ordinance. It doesn't have a pathway
And there's
to an
Pat who
ordinance.
thinks it's funny.
It doesn't have a pathway to be able to have the police department enforce anything. You go up to the individual and say, excuse me, sir, madam, you know, you can't live on the street. It's like, oh, no, actually I can't live on the street because there's no ordinance. And that's what the problem is. We have no tools to enforce. We have no leverage.
And
The
Boise,
leverage
we
needs to
should
be
let
there
them
so that
challenge
we
us.
can
Just
push
do it.
people into programs so they can
There's
get
a
help.
bunch of cities challenging it.
Not
Just challenge
incarcerate. I don't want to incarcerate.
To
I
hell
don't
with
think
it.
anybody wants people in jail.
This thing's gonna get
We want people to
fast
get
tracked
help.
and struck down, I believe.
But we're never going to achieve that unless we bring something solid.
Just bring in an
Thank you.
ordinance. Let's take the risk.
Councilmember Hill.
That was
Thank you,
fun.
Mayor.
That was,
I'm going to support the recommendation of the Social Service Commission. The only thing that I would want to add is that on the homeless task, that be comprised of city staff and partnering agencies, that residents, that we include residents as a part of the task force, and that make sure that the partnering agencies can include HUD and some VA agencies that can help us coordinate with VA housing. And I want to say that I think this is moving towards a solution that we have in Torrance. And I want to commend the Social Service Commission, the work that is done over the past months. You did exactly what we had tasked you to do as the City Council, and this is the next step in developing some hardcore solutions to the problems that we face. Again, I'm going to support the recommendation.